Welcome to Florence, Italy, the undisputed cradle of the Renaissance and arguably one of the most breathtaking cities in the world. If you have ever dreamed of walking through a living, breathing, open-air museum, you are in the exact right place. Today, we are taking you on a journey through the heart of Tuscany's capital. We are going to wander down centuries-old cobblestone streets, stand in the shadows of architectural giants, and get up close to some of the greatest artistic achievements in human history. We are starting our walk right in the spiritual and geographical centre of the city, Piazza del Duomo. Just look at the sheer scale of the architecture opening up before us. The moment you step into this square, it commands your attention. All around us, you can see the intricate patterns of white, pink, and green marble gleaming in the sunlight. This square has been the heartbeat of Florence for hundreds of years. It is always buzzing with energy, a mix of locals going about their day and travellers from every corner of the globe. Even with the crowds, there is a sense of awe here that never quite fades. You can feel the weight of history in the stones beneath your feet. And here it is, the undisputed jewel of the city, the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, better known to the world simply as the Duomo. Just take a look at the sheer scale of this building. It is almost impossible to capture its true size on camera. As we stand here at the base of these steps, you really have to crane your neck just to take in the top of the facade. Let's take a moment to just soak in this exterior. Every single inch is an absolute masterpiece. You are looking at a geometric tapestry of coloured marble. The white marble you see was brought all the way from the famous quarries of Carrara. The vibrant green comes from Prato, just a short distance from Florence, and the beautiful soft pink marble was brought in from Siena. Together, these colours represent the traditional Tuscan architectural style, and they gleam incredibly whenever the sunlight hits them just right. But what is fascinating is that the beautiful facade we are looking at right now isn't actually the original. For centuries, the front of this magnificent cathedral was left completely bare and unfinished. It wasn't until the late 19th century that an architect named Emilio de Fabris won a competition to finally design this neo-Gothic masterpiece. He wanted it to perfectly honour the rest of the medieval building, and looking at the intricately carved statues and the towering bronze doors, it is safe to say he succeeded. The story of this cathedral begins all the way back in 1296. Florence was a wealthy, wildly ambitious republic. Their great rivals, the cities of Siena and Pisa, were building magnificent cathedrals of their own, and the Florentines simply could not allow themselves to be outdone. They wanted a church that reflected their rising power, their wealth, and their absolute dominance in the region. So they tore down the ancient, much smaller church of Santa Reparata that originally stood on this spot and commissioned a celebrated architect named Arnolfo di Cambio to design something that would shock the world. He gave it the name Saint Mary of the Flower. This is a direct reference to the lily, the historic symbol of Florence that you will see stamped on flags, shields, and buildings all over the city. As we continue our walk down the side of the nave, it is worth thinking about the sheer wealth that made all of this possible. Who was paying for this massive undertaking? During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Florence was an absolute powerhouse of international banking and the wool trade. In fact, it was the powerful Arte della Lana, the guild of wool merchants, who took charge of funding and overseeing the construction of the Duomo. The merchants and bankers of this city, most notably the legendary Medici family, used their vast fortunes to sponsor artists, sculptors, and architects. They believed that civic beauty was a direct reflection of civic power. By funding public monuments, they were essentially buying prestige, and in doing so, they kick-started the Renaissance. The dome is the defining feature of the Florentine skyline, but for decades it was the city's greatest embarrassment. You see, the cathedral was designed to be so grand that by the time they finished the walls in the late 1300s, they had left a gaping, massive hole in the roof. The span was nearly 45 meters across. The problem? Nobody in the world actually knew how to build a dome that large. The architectural knowledge of the ancient Romans had been lost, and no wooden scaffolding in the world was tall enough or strong enough to support a masonry vault of that size. For decades, it reigned right into the middle of the church. It was a giant architectural puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. Then, in 1418, the city held a competition to find a solution. Enter Filippo Brunelleschi. He was a goldsmith by trade, a clockmaker, and a bit of an eccentric genius. He promised the city he could build the dome without any wooden scaffolding supporting it from the ground. The city officials thought he was crazy, but they were desperate, so they gave him the job. Brunelleschi had to invent entirely new hoisting machines driven by oxen just to lift the millions of bricks hundreds of feet into the air. He designed a brilliant double-shell structure, a lighter outer dome to protect the building from the weather, and a thicker inner dome to support the weight. To keep the bricks from falling inward as the dome curved up, he used a spectacular herringbone bricklaying pattern that locked the masonry into place. It took 16 years to build, but when it was finished in 1436, it forever changed the course of architectural history. Even today, it remains the largest masonry dome ever built. It is a true testament to human ingenuity. while we take in the atmosphere of the square around us, which is bustling with horse-drawn carriages, street musicians, and visitors from every corner of the earth, let us tell you a darker story about what happened inside these very walls. Because the Duomo wasn't just a place of worship, it was the centre of Florentine political life. And sometimes that life was incredibly violent. In April of 1478, this cathedral was the scene of one of the most famous assassinations in Italian history, the Pazzi conspiracy. The Pazzi were a rival banking family who wanted to overthrow the ruling Medici family. They hatched a plot to murder Lorenzo the Magnificent and his brother Giuliano de' Medici during High Mass on Easter Sunday, right beneath Brunelleschi's dome. At the exact moment the priest raised the communion host and the crowd bowed their heads, the assassins struck. Giuliano was tragically stabbed to death on the cathedral floor. But Lorenzo the Magnificent fought back. Bleeding from a wound to his neck, he managed to escape into the sacristy with his friends, barricading the heavy bronze doors behind him. Lorenzo survived. The people of Florence rallied behind him, and the Pazzi conspirators were hunted down and hanged from the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio. It is wild to think that such a serene, holy, and beautiful place was once the setting for a bloody political thriller. This is the magic of Florence. You are walking the same exact pavement that Dante, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo once walked. You are standing in the shadow of a building that pushed the absolute limits of human capability. The Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore isn't just a church. It is the very soul of Florence made out of stone. Leaving the grand scale of the cathedral behind, we are now slipping into the narrower, more intimate streets of the historic centre. These narrow lanes really invite you to slow down and look around. If you look up, you will notice the heavy wooden shutters, the ornate wrought iron lanterns, and the tiny religious shrines called tabernacles, built right into the corners of the buildings. Centuries ago, long before modern streetlights, the flickering candles in these shrines were often the only things lighting the way home at night for the citizens of Florence. You might also spot massive iron rings bolted to the walls. Those were once used to tie up the horses of visiting merchants or nobles. As we walk, you will see a wonderful mix of traditional workshops nestled right alongside modern boutiques. Florence is still very much a city of artisans. Through these open doors, you can sometimes catch a glimpse of leather workers treating hides, or bookbinders crafting beautiful marbled paper, an art form brought here centuries ago. The smell of rich, genuine leather floating out of these bottigas is simply intoxicating. It reminds you that the Renaissance spirit of craftsmanship is still very much alive today. Of course, we cannot walk through these streets without talking about the incredible food. If you are a food lover, Florence is absolute paradise. The cuisine here is deeply tied to the Tuscan countryside. It is hearty, rustic, and relies heavily on high quality. Simple ingredients. You will pass countless little osterias and trattorias serving up the legendary bistecca alla Fiorentina. This is a massive, thick-cut T-bone steak, traditionally sourced from local Chianina cattle, grilled over wood coals and strictly served rare. It is an absolute must-try when you visit, but it is definitely meant to be shared. If you are just looking for a quick bite while exploring, the street food scene is just as amazing. Locals and visitors alike will line up for schiacciata, a crispy, salty Tuscan flatbread heavily drizzled with olive oil and stuffed with fresh pecorino cheese, truffle cream, and thinly sliced cured meats. And if you are feeling truly adventurous, you have to try lampredotto. It is a slow-cooked tripe sandwich topped with a zesty green herb sauce. It might sound a bit intimidating to some, but it is the ultimate Florentine comfort food. And let's not forget dessert after all. Florence is widely considered the birthplace of modern gelato. We have looped back around toward Cathedral Square. Right in front of us sits the Baptistry of St. John, that striking octagonal building. It is actually one of the oldest structures in all of Florence, predating the current cathedral by centuries. It is most famous for its stunning bronze doors, particularly the gleaming gold east doors. The artistry and use of perspective was so revolutionary that Michelangelo famously declared them the gates of paradise. The visual harmony between the baptistry, the bell tower, and the cathedral is just perfect. It is a true masterclass in Renaissance urban design. Standing proudly next to the church is Giotto's bell tower, rising almost 85 meters into the Tuscan sky. It was designed by the great master painter and architect Giotto in 1334. If you look closely at the lower levels, you can see a series of incredibly detailed hexagonal panels and statues. They beautifully depict the story of human creation, art, and industry. And if you are ever feeling energetic, climbing the 414 steps to the top gives you one of the most spectacular vantage points in all of Italy, largely because it allows you to look directly across at Brunelleschi's magnificent dome. As you can see around us, tourism is a massive part of daily life here. Florence is incredibly compact, which makes it wonderfully walkable. But it also means these central squares are always pulsing with life, language, and movement. We always love just standing here for a moment, listening to the street musicians play while people from all over the world gather to admire the exact same stones that inspired the Renaissance. We have now stepped into Piazza della Repubblica. Notice how the architecture suddenly changes. The tight medieval alleys open up and everything feels much wider and much more symmetrical. Long before it looked like this exact spot was actually the ancient Roman Forum. It has literally been the geographical and commercial centre of Florence for over 2,000 years. So why is it called the Square of the Republic? The name celebrates the modern unification of Italy. Back in the late 19th century, Florence very briefly served as the capital of this newly unified nation. To prepare for that prestigious role, the city underwent a massive and somewhat controversial urban renewal project. They completely cleared away the old medieval market and the ancient Jewish ghetto to build this grand Parisian-style space. Just a short walk away from the grand squares, we find ourselves stepping under the beautiful stone arches of the Mercato Nuovo, or the New Market. Everywhere you look, there are colourful displays of handcrafted bags, belts, and beautiful silk scarves. But don't let the name New Market fool you. This elegant covered square was actually built way back in 1547 under the orders of Duke Cosimo I de' Medici. Originally, this space was an exclusive financial and trading hub. It was where the city's wealthiest merchants would meet to trade in pure silk, precious gems, and gold. It was strictly heavily regulated. No weapons were allowed inside, and it was a place of high-stakes Renaissance commerce. If you look closely at the floor right in the very centre of the market, there is a marble circle embedded in the ground. It is called the Stone of Shame. Back in the Renaissance, if a Florentine merchant went bankrupt or couldn't pay his debts, he was brought right here, stripped of his trousers, and publicly humiliated before being exiled. It is a harsh reminder of how seriously Florence took its banking. Today, of course, the vibe is much more joyful. It is bustling with visitors haggling for leather goods and locals passing through the shade of the grand arches. But as we make our way to the southern edge of the market, we are going to meet one of Florence's most famous and beloved residents. There he is, Il Porcellino. Despite the name playfully translating to the little pig, it is actually a beautiful bronze statue of a wild boar. The original was cast in the 17th century by the sculptor Pietro Tacco, and it was so beloved that even the Medici kept it in their private gardens before it was brought out for the public. Notice how the boar's snout is gleaming bright gold. That is from millions of hands touching it over the centuries. Tradition says that if you want to ensure your return to Florence, you have to follow a very specific ritual. First, you rub his golden snout. Then you place a coin flat on his tongue and let it slide off. If the coin falls perfectly through the iron grate below, it means you will definitely return to this beautiful city one day, and it brings you good luck. If it misses, well, you just have to try again. It is a fun, superstitious little tradition that every visitor really has to try at least once. And the best part is that all the coins collected from the grate are actually donated to a local children's charity here in Florence. We are now entering Piazza della Signoria, which is without a doubt the political and historical heart of Florence. As we walk into this magnificent L-shaped space, the atmosphere shifts completely. If the Piazza del Duomo, which we explored earlier, is the spiritual centre of the city, this square is the absolute seat of power. For centuries, this was the stage where the fate of Florence was decided. But what makes this piazza truly breathtaking and completely unique in the world is that it doubles as a free, open-air sculpture gallery. Florence didn't hide its absolute masterpieces away behind closed doors or velvet ropes. It put them right out in the street for the public to admire, to be inspired by, and sometimes to be intimidated by. As we look around, you have incredible, priceless works of Renaissance art standing exactly where they were placed centuries ago. This wasn't just done for decoration. In Renaissance Florence, art was the ultimate form of political propaganda. Every statue you see was commissioned to send a specific message to the citizens and to rival cities. Just imagine the history that has unfolded on these very cobblestones. This square has seen glittering festivals, fierce riots, and dramatic executions. If you look closely at the pavement near the centre of the square, there is a circular brass plaque set into the ground that marks the exact spot where the radical Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola held his infamous bonfire of the vanities in 1497, burning thousands of books, paintings, and mirrors. Ironically, just a year later, the city turned on him, and he was executed on that very same spot. Today, the energy is much more joyful. The square is lined with bustling cafes, and you can always hear the chatter of tourists and the music of street performers echoing off the stone walls. But as we stroll through, surrounded by these towering monuments of marble and bronze, you can still feel the heavy, magnificent weight of the past. Dominating the entire square is the incredible Palazzo Vecchio, with its heavy, rusticated stone walls, its sharp battlements, and that striking, off-centre tower. It honestly looks much more like a medieval fortress than a traditional palace. And that was entirely by design. It was built at the turn of the 14th century to house the city's governing council, known as the Signoria. Back then, Florence was an incredibly volatile place. Rival families were constantly at each other's throats, and political turbulence often spilled out into violent street battles. The magistrates needed a building that could literally withstand a siege, a place where they could lock themselves safely inside while ruling the city. The building was designed by Arnolfo di Cambio, the very same genius architect who began the Duomo. If you are wondering why the massive 94-metre bell tower is positioned strangely off-centre, it is because Arnolfo brilliantly incorporated an older, pre-existing family tower right into the new design to save time and money. For over 700 years, this building has been the ultimate enduring symbol of civil power in Florence. Even when the powerful Medici dynasty finally took absolute control of the city in the 16th century, they moved their residence here to prove that they were the undisputed rulers of Florence. It is imposing, it is incredibly sturdy, and standing right beneath it, you can't help but feel small. It was perfectly designed to remind everyone in the square below exactly who was in charge. Now, Let's turn our attention back to the incredible art in the square, because we need to look closer at these individual masterpieces. First, we are walking over to the side of the square to step under this beautiful arch gallery known as the Loggia dei Lanzi. This structure was originally built in the 14th century to house public ceremonies and assemblies, but later the Medici family transformed it into a jaw-dropping outdoor sculpture gallery. As we step under the arches, the first thing that commands your attention is Benvenuto Cellini's famous bronze masterpiece, Perseus with the head of Medusa. It is a haunting, victorious statue. Cellini's casting of this bronze was an absolute nightmare. The furnace almost exploded, the metal started to cool too fast, and he allegedly had to throw all of his own household pewter plates into the fire just to melt the alloy. But the result is flawless, and again it carried a political warning. Perseus was meant to represent the Medici Duke holding up the severed head of the Republic.
Not see a single red bus.
Moving out from under the arches and back into the open sunlight, just a few steps away is the massive fountain of Neptune. Crafted from brilliantly white marble by Bartolomeo Ammanati. This was Florence's very first public fountain. It was commissioned to celebrate a new aqueduct and to symbolize Florentine dominance over the seas. Because the marble is so bright against the stone square, the locals playfully nicknamed him Il Bianco, the big white one. Finally, as we walk just past the fountain, right next to the entrance of the Palazzo Vecchio, we are greeted by a very familiar face. This is a full-sized replica of Michelangelo's David. The original stood in this exact spot for over 350 years before being moved indoors to the Accademia Gallery to protect it from the weather. When it was placed here in 1504, the David became a powerful symbol of the fierce, independent Florentine Republic, staring down the giant tyrannical forces that surrounded the city. Beside David is another massive statue, Hercules and Cacus, by Baxio Bandinelli. It shows the demigod Hercules standing victorious over a defeated monster. This was commissioned by the Medici family after they reclaimed power, sending a clear warning that they would crush their enemies just like Hercules did. Though, as a funny historical side note, Michelangelo and other art critics of the time absolutely hated this statue, mocking it relentlessly for looking like a sack of melons. Standing here, looking out over the piazza, we are literally surrounded by the legacies of Michelangelo, Donatello, Gambologna, and the Medici dynasty. There is nowhere else on earth where you can simply wander off the street and find yourself face to face with this caliber of artistic triumph. Every single statue here tells a profound story of myth, of raw power, and of human ambition. It is the absolute essence of the Renaissance, perfectly preserved for us to enjoy today. Let's take a brief detour inside to explore the mind of one of history's absolute greatest geniuses, Leonardo da Vinci. While we have been surrounded by the incredible classical art of Florence today, this specific museum offers something a little bit different. Though Leonardo is world famous for his paintings, this space focuses entirely on his broader work as an engineer, an anatomist, and a visionary inventor. Leonardo was actually born just a short distance from here, in the small Tuscan hill town of Vinci, in 1452. He moved to Florence as a teenager to apprentice in the workshop of the master artist Andrea del Verrocchio. It was right here in the bustling, highly competitive streets of Renaissance Florence that his endlessly curious mind was truly shaped. What we are looking at as we wander through these rooms is the physical realization of his famous notebooks. Throughout his life, Leonardo filled thousands of pages with his iconic backwards mirror writing and incredibly detailed sketches of the world around him. Looking at the vast array of intricate wooden models in this museum, which were built by modern artisans directly from his 500-year-old drawings, you really start to realize just how terrifyingly far ahead of his time he truly was. Rather than just painting, he was constantly observing how things work. He spent countless hours studying the mechanics of birds and bats, consumed by a lifelong obsession with human flight. He drafted endless concepts for machines that could carry a person into the sky, centuries before the invention of the airplane. But his imagination didn't stop there. As we browse through the exhibits, you get a sense of how he applied his mind to almost every field imaginable. He conceptualized advanced machines for warfare and defense, early robotics, complex gear systems, and civil engineering projects that were completely revolutionary for the 1400s. What made Leonardo so completely unique was that he didn't see a dividing line between art and science. To him, studying the anatomy of a human arm was just as important as understanding the mechanics of a lever or the flow of water in a river. He believed that everything in nature was deeply connected. Wandering through a space like this is a perfect reminder that the Renaissance wasn't just about beautiful paintings and marble statues. It was an absolute explosion of science, mathematics, curiosity, and relentless innovation. We are now approaching the absolute most famous crossing of the Arno River, and arguably one of the most iconic bridges in the entire world, the Ponte Vecchio, which simply translates to the Old Bridge. Just taking in the silhouette from a distance, it is unlike any other bridge you will ever see. What makes it so instantly recognizable are all of these little buildings clinging precariously to the sides of it, suspended over the water, seemingly defying gravity. There has actually been a bridge on this exact spot since ancient Roman times. The Via Cassia, the great Roman road, crossed the Arno River right here. But those early bridges were made of wood, and they were constantly destroyed by the river's violent floods. In 1333, a massive, catastrophic flood completely wiped out the previous bridge. So 12 years later, in 1345, the Florentines rebuilt it entirely in stone using this elegant three-arch design. It was an engineering marvel of its time. And as we are about to see, it was built to last. As we step onto the bridge itself, notice how it almost feels like we haven't left the city streets at all. It feels like a normal, bustling Florentine alleyway that just happens to be suspended over a river. Today, as we walk past these glittering storefronts, every single window is filled with brilliant, sparkling gold, silver, and precious gems. But it wasn't always this glamorous. In fact, for its first few centuries, this bridge was the smelliest, most chaotic part of Florence. Originally, the city government rented these shops out to the local butchers, fishmongers, and leather tanners. They did this for a very practical reason. It allowed the butchers to simply toss all of their animal waste, bones, and scraps directly into the river below, rather than letting it rot in the city streets. You can only imagine the smell on a hot Tuscan summer day. So, how did it go from bloody butcher shops to high-end jewellery? For that, we have to look up. If you look right above the shops on the eastern side of the bridge, you will see a row of small, square windows running along the upper level. That is the famous Vasari corridor. In 1565, the powerful Grand Duke Cosimo, the first de' Medici, had just moved his family across the river to the massive Palazzo Pitti. But the Duke's government offices were still over at the Palazzo Vecchio, where we were earlier. Cosimo didn't want to walk through the dirty, crowded, and dangerous streets to get to work, so he hired his favourite architect, Giorgio Vasari, to build a secret, elevated, private hallway connecting his home to his office. This mile-long corridor goes right over the Ponte Vecchio, but when the Duke used his private hallway, he absolutely hated the rotting stench of the butcher shops rising up from below. So, in 1593, his son, Ferdinando I, issued a decree. The butchers were permanently evicted. From that day forward, only goldsmiths and jewellers were allowed to set up shop on the bridge to increase its prestige and clean up the air. And that law still stands today. Standing here, it is impossible not to think about the incredible resilience of this bridge. In August 1944, as the German army was retreating from Florence during World War II, they blew up every single historic bridge in the city to slow down the advancing Allied forces. Every bridge except this one. Legend has it that the Ponte Vecchio was spared by a direct order from Adolf Hitler, who had visited Florence years earlier and was captivated by the view from the Vasari corridor. Instead of destroying the bridge, the retreating army blew up all the medieval buildings at both ends, blocking the access points with mountains of rubble, but leaving the bridge itself intact. It survived the war and it famously survived the devastating Florentine flood of 1966, when the raging waters of the Arno rose so high they completely submerged these jewellery shops. Right in front of us stands the breathtaking Basilica of Santa Maria Novella. If you arrived in Florence by train, the main station is right behind this church and shares its name. So this is often the very first magnificent glimpse of Renaissance art that visitors get when they step into the city. This is the great Dominican Church of Florence, and we always highly recommend taking a moment to just stand back and admire this facade. It is an absolute masterclass in Renaissance geometry and proportion. The stunning green and white marble patterns you see on the upper half were completed by the brilliant architect Leon Battista Alberti in the 1470s. What makes Alberti's work so genius is how he perfectly blended his mathematically precise, modern Renaissance style on top with the older medieval Gothic arches on the bottom. He even invented those elegant, sweeping S-curves, the scrolls on the sides, simply to hide the awkward sloping roof of the nave behind it. It is a seamless design that went on to inspire countless churches all over the world. The square itself, Piazza Santa Maria Novella, is one of our absolute favourite places to just sit and breathe. It feels wonderfully calm and open compared to the heavily crowded centre. Hundreds of years ago, the Medici Grand Dukes used to hold spectacular chariot races. Right here, in this very piazza, you can actually still see the 2 marble obelisks they used as turning posts. Today, however, it is just a lovely, tranquil place to sit on a bench, watch the world go by, and take in the elegant atmosphere of the city. As evening falls, there is no better way to end a day in Florence than by sitting down for a beautiful Tuscan meal. A fresh plate of handmade pasta, a cold drink, and a front row seat to the illuminated Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. Seeing the Duomo lit up against the night sky is truly pure magic. Florence is a city that captures our hearts and refuses to let go. Thank you so much for joining us on this walking tour. If you enjoyed exploring these historic streets with us, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments which part of Florence was your absolute favourite. From beautiful Florence, thank you for joining us. Until next time.